Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a concept that is, well, absolutely fundamental to understanding how modern production works. It's called cooperation. And it might seem simple, but as we're about to see, it unleashes this kind of hidden power that changes literally everything.
So let's kick things off with this question. I'm sure you've heard the phrase a million times, but what does it actually mean when we're talking about work and making things? The answer, it turns out, reveals a huge shift in how economic value gets created. And this quote right here, it just gets straight to the heart of the matter. The argument is that when a bunch of people combine their efforts, they're not just adding up their individual strengths. No, they're creating something brand new, a collective social power that just didn't exist when they were all working alone.
Okay, let's get into it. This new power, it begins with a really simple, almost obvious change. Just gathering a whole lot of workers to do the same job in the same place.
If you look back, this is really the starting point of capitalist production. It wasn't about a new invention or some totally different way of working. It was simply about scale. You go from a tiny shop with a master and maybe an apprentice to a much, much bigger workshop.
Now think about it. If you look at workers on their own, each one is totally unique, right? Peter might be really fast, but Paul is maybe a bit more meticulous. Their individual output is going to be all over the place because of these personal differences in skill and speed and just how they work.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when you put them all together? The text points to an observation from Edmund Burke, who noticed that in a group, all these individual quirks, the fast workers and the slow ones, the super skilled and the not so skilled, they all start to balance each other out. They kind of cancel each other out.
And this leads to this huge concept, average social labor. Suddenly, for the capitalist who's hired them, the work of the group becomes predictable. It becomes reliable. And this was an absolutely revolutionary idea. It meant that for the first time, labor could be treated like a consistent, calculable thing, which allows for massive scale planning and, predictable profits. So now that we have this idea of average labor, let's explore the real, practical advantages that just pop up when people work together. The example the text uses is just perfect. Picture this, a line of a dozen masons passing stones up a ladder. They create this continuous, super efficient flow. That stone gets to the top way faster than if each mason had to run up and down the ladder all by themselves. It's the same simple task, but doing it together makes it a whole new, faster process. And this new productive power, it starts showing up everywhere. It lets people do things that would be totally impossible for one person, like lifting something incredibly heavy. The text also points out that just being around other people can create a bit of a friendly rivalry that boosts everyone's game. It makes it possible to do complex jobs all at once, to hit critical deadlines like a harvest, and to even think about taking on massive projects like building roads or canals. And the benefits aren't just about the labor itself. It's also about the tools and the buildings and the materials, what the source calls the means of production. This chart illustrates the point brilliantly. I mean, it's just common sense, right? It costs way, way less to build and maintain one big workshop for 20 people than it does to run 10 separate little workshops for 2 people each. You're sharing tools, you're sharing space, everything is used more economically. Okay, so once you have all these people and all these different processes working together, a new role just sort of has to emerge. You need someone to make sure it all runs in harmony. The source uses this fantastic analogy here. A solo violinist, they conduct themselves, but an orchestra, with all its different instruments and parts, needs a conductor to make a single, beautiful piece of music. Well, the same thing is true for large-scale combined labor. So, in this system of capitalist production, that necessary job, directing, superintending, it becomes a specific function that's performed by or on behalf of the capitalist who brought that orchestra of workers together in the first place. All right, but this is where the analysis gets really, really sharp. This new collective power that's been created, who does it actually belong to? The source asks this really critical question. It seems logical, doesn't it? If the workers, by working together, create this extra productivity, then surely it's their power, right?
Well, the author's answer is a very firm no. The argument goes like this. Since the capitalist bought each worker's labor power one by one, and then they were the ones who assembled them, this new collective force that gets created during the work process, it already belongs to the capitalist.
So here's the crucial point. This new power is basically a free bonus. It doesn't cost the capitalist anything extra, but it massively increases the output. And because of that, it starts to look like it was just a natural built-in feature of capital all along, instead of something created by the workers. And that becomes a huge source of profit. And the text takes this a step further. It says that the conductor's role, the manager's control, it has a dual nature. On the one hand, yeah, it's necessary to make sure everything works together smoothly. But on the other hand, its main goal is exploitation, to squeeze out the most surplus value possible. And in that function, the text argues, the control becomes despotic. Okay, let's move to our final section. Let's zoom out and see how this all builds into what the text calls a unique historical form of production. I mean, look, humans have always worked together. That's nothing new. Think about ancient communities building the pyramids or tribes hunting together. But the text draws a really sharp line here. Those older forms were based on things like common ownership or straight-up slavery. Capitalist cooperation is fundamentally different, it argues, because its whole foundation is the free wage laborer who is selling their ability to work. In this final slide, this really brings the whole core argument into focus. Cooperation isn't just one strategy out of many. The text identifies it as the very first change that happens to labor once it's organized by capital. That makes it the bedrock, the fundamental form of the entire capitalist system. So we'll end with this question for you to chew on. In a system where this incredible productive power is generated by the group, but it's owned by capital, what does that mean for the value of any one person's contribution? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of our modern economy.